The sound of my name spat with contempt was like a sharp blow to the chest. It wasn't a street brawl, nor the voice of a hostile stranger. It was intimate, close, coming from inside my own home. The first word of that audio carried enough venom to cut through years of silence and patience. Froze. My fingers were sweating, my heart hammering against my ribs. What could be so serious about a simple voicemail? I pressed play again, as if touching a flame to make sure it's burned. Her voice didn't tremble, it held no regrets. She spoke of me as if she were talking about a nuisance, something to be thrown away after use. And then came the muffled, knowing laugh that left no doubt. It wasn't just contempt. It was a plan. It was a conspiracy. The kind of laugh that turns a mother into a target, a lifetime of sacrifice into disposable currency. The sentences came fast, sharp, each one opening a different wound. She's already given what she had to give. She's taking up too much space. If we can get her to sign, everything will be resolved. Cold words, thrown like knives, piercing my confidence with the precision of someone who's rehearsed many times. And in the background, another voice, more familiar than any other, responded with laughter. My own son. The room I was in seemed to shrink. The walls came alive, closing in, as if they wanted to crush me along with the discovery. I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. It wasn't possible. Couldn't be real. How could someone I'd carried in my arms, whom I'd rocked through feverish nights, now laugh at me while plotting behind my back? The message seemed endless. Every second revealed a new layer of rot. Small sentences, cursed between the lines, spoke of secrets that went far beyond disrespect. It was a web of hidden intentions, woven with poisonous patience, waiting just for the right moment to engulf me. 7 secrets like 7 locked doors, and each one that opened took me deeper into a dark corridor. Felt the air thin. The ground that had seemed solid was now quicksand. It wasn't just gossip. It wasn't a spiteful daughter-in-law venting anger. It was greed. It was calculation. It was an attempt to make me a disposable piece so they could inherit what I'd built with my hard work. Like a seemingly solid house beginning to reveal cracks in its foundation, my life was about to crumble. But there was something inside me that wouldn't budge. A knot of pain and fury formed in the pit of my stomach. I could choose to close my eyes and pretend nothing had happened, as I so often did in the face of sidelong glances, disguised jokes, and silences that cornered me at the table. Or I could keep listening until the end, even if each word was a hammer blow to my own peace. Listening became inevitable. I needed to know the whole truth, however bitter. Because amidst that poison, there was also an opportunity. Every secret revealed could be the weapon I didn't know I had. Every recorded sentence, a piece of evidence. It was like walking on shards of glass. Each step hurt, but I was getting closer to the clearing, to the moment when the light would finally reveal the whole picture. And then a question began to hammer, repeated within me like thunder in a storm. When a blow comes from the one you love most, where can you turn for support? I didn't have the answer yet. I only knew that the audio wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip-up. It was a call to the abyss. And, at the same time, the key that could turn the tide and transform every humiliation into strength. I stood there, phone still in hand, staring into space like someone lost within themselves. Those familiar voices exposed a scenario I'd always feared but never wanted to face. It wasn't just a lack of affection, it wasn't just carelessness. It was a project, patiently constructed, to reduce me until I believed I was worthless. And it hurt because it didn't begin with that voicemail. That was just the culmination of a long road of forced silences. I remember the first times I realized something had changed. Family gatherings where my speech was cut short, as if my stories were unimportant. The muffled laughter when I commented on anything, as if my age had robbed me of my lucidity. The plate removed from my face before I'd finished, as if I took up too much space even on the table I'd bought myself. with every gesture a message. I was no longer central, I was an annoying detail. And I accepted it most of the time. Because my whole life I'd been taught to endure it. To endure sidelong glances at the grocery store. To endure neighbors who called me the brunette from the apartment, without ever bothering to learn my name. Enduring bosses who praised my efforts but never promoted me because it was already too good to have the opportunity. I carried this burden as if it were a natural part of existence, unaware that, little by little, it was breaking me down. Before I knew it, I was shrinking even inside my own house. But there's something no one has been able to erase. The memory of the woman I once was. The woman who waded through crowded buses to get to work before sunrise. Who wouldn't buy new shoes so her son wouldn't be cold in the winter. Who stood up to arrogant doctors to demand respect when her husband fell ill. That woman is still within me. She's just been pushed to the sidelines, buried under layers of disdain. As I listened to that message, each word pulled me back to her. It was like pulling a heavy cloth from a dusty mirror. I saw myself reflected again, but not the fragile figure they wanted me to believe. I saw myself as a survivor. And a survivor doesn't accept being discarded. That's why so many people choose to stay here, following each revelation. Because deep down we all know that feeling of being diminished, of being treated as invisible. When someone puts into words what you've experienced, it's like a light turns on inside you, and that light never goes out. I took a deep breath, my heart still racing, and put my phone back in the drawer. But I couldn't close my mind. The question persisted. How far were they willing to go? The audio had already revealed too much, but it left traces of something even greater. And I needed to follow those trails, even if they led me deeper into the abyss. That night I couldn't sleep. The message played in my head like a broken record, repeating the same cruel phrases over and over. The silence of the room only made the memory echo louder. It was like lying on hot coals, outwardly still, but inwardly ablaze. I closed my eyes and saw my son's face as a small child, laughing innocently. Now that same laughter was mixed with mockery, supporting the woman who treated me like trash. The contrast crushed me. That morning, as I sat at the table for coffee, I noticed signs that had previously seemed like insignificant details. My daughter-in-law's impatient look when I served myself first. My son's heavy sigh when I took a little too long to tell him something. The interrupted whispers when I entered the room. Everything took on new meaning. They weren't random gestures. They were bricks in a wall that was pushing me further and further away from them. I'd always wanted to believe it was just me, that I was being too sensitive. Now I understood. I'd been naive. It felt like walking down a narrow corridor, with doors closing behind me. Every memory became proof that the conspiracy hadn't sprung from thin air. It had been cultivated, drop by drop, until it formed the poison that slipped through that audio. And I, without realizing it, had helped fuel this plot with my blind trust. As I stirred my spoon in my now cold coffee, I thought about how life can change in silence. You live believing you're on solid ground, but suddenly you discover you've been walking on thin ice. All it takes is one crack for everything to crumble. And the sound of that crack was there, recorded, stored in my phone's memory, proving that my fragility was the foundation of their plan. Fear came first. Fear of losing what I'd achieved. Fear of being pushed out of my own story. But along with fear came something else. A stubborn memory of everything I'd faced. The early morning cold at the bus stop. The humiliation swallowed in silence to ensure I made it to the end of the month. The times I had to feign calm to protect my children from greater pain. I knew the weight of falling, but I also knew the strength of survival. Still, the pain was real. My body felt heavy, as if I were carrying sacks of stone on my shoulders. Every gesture came back to me. My daughter-in-law's hands snatching my plate from the table, my son interrupting me with disdain. Small scenes that I had previously swallowed now pierced me like blades. There was no turning back. I couldn't unsee what I had already heard. The day dragged on, but something strange was growing inside me. A mixture of fear and determination. As if I were standing on the edge of an abyss, seeing the darkness below, but also sensing a hidden rope, ready to be used if I had the courage to look for it. It was this feeling that kept me breathing. The certainty that there was still a hidden path, something waiting to be revealed. And it was in this state of alert that I noticed a detail in the audio that had escaped me until then. A clue almost whispered amidst the conspiracy. A clue that could change everything if I had the courage to follow it through. I listened to the audio clip again, this time more carefully, letting each second sink in. Amidst laughter and venomous phrases, a voice whispered something almost hidden. It mentioned dates, spoke of documents, hinted at its intention to act quickly before I realized. It was a crack, an oversight. And in that oversight, I saw an open door. My heart sank, but with it came a spark of clarity. They were so confident in my fragility that they didn't bother to hide every detail. Suddenly, the room I was in took on a different contour. The clock on the wall ticked too slowly, as if trying to force me to consider every movement. The sound of the street drifted in through the window, seeming distant and irrelevant. There was only me, my cell phone, and the revelation that my life was under siege, closing in silently. But within that silence, there was also a choice. I could give in, let fear engulf me, or I could turn fear into a lens, see every sign clearly. I remembered a simple scene from my son's childhood. He was learning to ride a bike. He fell several times, scraped his knees, but persevered until he found his balance. Today I realize that, without knowing it, this is how I've educated myself my entire life. I scraped my knees in so many situations, swallowed so many no's, accepted so many dirty looks, and still remained standing. This memory brought warmth to my chest, a contrast to the coldness of what I had just heard. As if the past wanted to remind me that I was not only made of pain, but also of resilience. As this memory washed over me, I realized my breathing had calmed. It wasn't peace, it was something else. It was the kind of serenity that precedes a storm, when the sky seems asleep, but everyone knows the rain is coming. And it's at this point that many feel the urge to support this journey, leaving a silent sign that the message has touched them, like a gesture of someone who understands the weight and doesn't want to carry it alone. I ran my fingers over the phone screen, as if caressing a fragile object, but there was no fragility there. There was ammunition. Each recorded word was a bullet in the chamber, and the difference between winning and losing lay in how I chose to use them. This realization gave me a certain relief, even if momentary. It was like taking a deep breath in the midst of a storm and feeling, even if only for a moment, that my body was still alive. But every time I considered using that proof, a shadow loomed. What if they were faster? What if the trap was already set before I took my first step? This doubt followed me like a faceless figure, ever present. It was a reminder that nothing was decided. I was mid-game, and the board still held pieces I couldn't see. I lay that night with a restless mind. I closed my eyes and saw doors opening and closing, dark corridors, voices mingling. It was impossible to distinguish what was memory and what was fear. But within this turmoil was an uneasy certainty. The audio wasn't just a record of what people thought of me. It was also a map of something larger, still waiting to be unveiled. The next morning, the sky seemed too gray, as if reflecting the weight I carried inside. I walked to the kitchen and felt each step resonate differently, as if the house itself had changed its tone after what I'd discovered. The sound of the kettle boiling was too loud, too aggressive, and even the smell of coffee brought me a strange feeling of living in a place that no longer belonged to me. Everything around me seemed to have been contaminated by the poison of that audio. As I stirred the sugar in my cup, I thought about the years-old, disguised cruelty. It was as if the voicemail had peeled away a wall, revealing mold hidden behind the paint. This hadn't come out of nowhere. It was accumulated gestures, sidelong comments, silences that pushed me into a corner. Now, with the words recorded, I realized that every detail had been part of a larger plot. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the times I felt seen. There weren't many. The first one that came to me was a rainy night, when I came home from work and my son, still a toddler, ran to the door with a drawing in his hands. He had written, "Mommy is strong." I believed that phrase. And for years, it was that thread of hope that kept me going through the cracks of everyday life. But now, it was that same boy, grown and adult, who laughed in the background of the audio as they plotted against me. The contrast tore me apart inside. With every memory of affection came a shadow of betrayal. With every moment of pride came the weight of shame. I was on a cruel seesaw, oscillating between the memory of love and the proof of conspiracy. It was like walking on a narrow bridge, on one side the light of what I had built, on the other the darkness of what they were trying to tear from me. And the wind blowing was uncertainty, shaking the structure, trying to make me fall. There were moments when courage would emerge, unexpected, almost sweet. I would find myself lifting my head, looking ahead with determination. But soon after, fear would come, throbbing like an old pain, reminding me that the fall could be devastating. This alternation consumed me, but it also kept me awake. I couldn't give in to torpor. It was clear that something had to be done, that silence would no longer suffice. I felt then that the audio wasn't just proof of evil. It was also a call, a summons to something greater than I myself didn't yet understand. As if there were more hidden layers, more secrets waiting to emerge. The recording was just the door, and I had already placed my hand on the handle. The question remained, whether I would have the strength to turn and pass through to what lay on the other side. It was with this thought that I closed the drawer where I kept my cell phone. But the weight of the decision didn't stay there. It stayed with me, breathing down my neck, whispering that the worst was yet to come. That afternoon I sat by the window and watched the sky. The heavy clouds gathered as if announcing a storm, and for a moment, I felt that the scene was an exact reflection of what was happening inside me. It was as if each word of the audio had become thunder, ready to shatter the silence at any moment. The air was thick, difficult to breathe, but at the same time, there was a strange clarity amidst this oppression. It was impossible to deny. I was about to cross an invisible border. The memory of my son's laughter still throbbed in my ears. It wasn't just the sound, it was the weight behind it. There was complicity, there was choice. He didn't just listen, he participated. This realization tore me apart. It's a pain that doesn't bleed, but corrodes from within, like rust on old iron. And yet, amidst this rust, something shone. The possibility of fighting back. It was this spark that kept me going, even when everything inside me was screaming for it to crumble. I looked around the room and realized how the objects held stories that now seemed distant. The armchair where I sewed school clothes. The bookshelf filled with portraits that captured smiles that now seemed false to me. It was like walking through a museum of my own life, where each piece held both beauty and betrayal. This duality pierced me like a blade. The sweetness of what I had built and the bitterness of what they were trying to rip away. Fear returned in waves. Fear of being deceived again. Fear of falling into a carefully laid trap. Fear of losing not only my possessions but what little dignity I still had. But soon a persistent memory would come, like light filtering through cracks. The times I'd survived the impossible, when no one believed in me, and yet I'd still carried on. This memory told me there was still something to salvage. Time seemed to stretch. Each second carried an invisible tension, like a breath caught in my chest. I knew I couldn't remain still, but each step required more strength than I'd imagined. It was like being on a deserted road, knowing that darkness lay behind me and ahead of me lay only a distant glimmer, a glow that could be salvation or a mirage. Deep down I sensed the audio was just the surface. There was more. Words spoken in haste, secrets hidden in pauses, fragments of sentences that held even greater intentions. This sensation gave me chills, as if I were about to open a door that would change not only my destiny, but my entire perception of my own family. And it was in this state, between the weight of fear and the silent promise of revelation, that I realized my breath was holding. I still didn't know what I would find, but I was certain that every second brought me closer to the point where nothing could be hidden. I spent the rest of the day with that feeling of being watched, even inside my own home. It was as if every object carried a hidden gaze. Every shadow reminded me of the conspiracy revealed in the audio. The weight wasn't just in the recorded words, but in the silence that followed them. The silence of someone who believes they won't be discovered. And it was in this emptiness that I began to think about how my every move would be read and interpreted. From that moment on, there was no longer any room for naivete. As I walked through the rooms, I realized that the walls held two versions of my life. The story I always displayed, made of care, sacrifice, and love, and the hidden story, made of disdain, of planned traps, of laughter at my expense. This duality haunted me, but also awakened me. Because if they could play a silent game against me, I could also learn to play silently. The difference was that my strength lay in patience, in the ability to observe before acting. I thought about how my every gesture would go unnoticed if I maintained my usual appearance. The plate placed on the table, the restrained smile, the agreement in trivial conversations. All of this could be part of a disguise. I didn't need to show that I understood. I just had to wait for the right moment, like someone watching a web until the spider reveals itself whole. It was a contrast that gave me a certain advantage. They underestimated me, and I learned to use that underestimation as a shield. At night, I opened the window and looked out at the deserted street. The light from the street lamps illuminated patches of the sidewalk, but between the lights were pockets of shadow. That scene seemed an exact reflection of what I felt. Clarity in some spots, darkness in others. And it was in this interplay between light and shadow that I would have to walk. The fear was still there, but alongside it emerged a new kind of confidence, not noisy, but firm as dry ground after a flood. As this understanding grew, I also realized I wasn't alone in feeling this way. How many others have experienced this same contrast? How many have been treated as invisible, only to later discover they were the target of something greater? It's at this point that many feel the need to share their own stories, as if the weight becomes lessened when put into words. Perhaps that's why, if any memory or insight emerges, it's worth recording, not for my own sake, but because each echo of experience makes the silence lose its power. And so, between the darkness of what I still don't know and the clarity of what has already been revealed, I continue walking cautiously. The next step seems inevitable, but it remains shrouded in mystery, like a half-open door that only reveals itself to those brave enough to push. The next morning I sat by the window again. The street was nearly deserted, only the distant sound of a car breaking the silence. Looking into that emptiness made me realize how calm the world can seem on the outside while inside us, a war rages silently. I breathed deeply, trying to hold back my heart that seemed to want to escape my chest, and thought about how every move from then on would need to be calculated. It wasn't just about enduring, it was about resisting without leaving a trace of despair. The following days were like walking on a hidden board. I feigned normalcy, flashed restrained smiles, and answered banal questions. But deep down, every gesture was noted, weighed, and scrutinized. I discovered that my daughter-in-law's gaze lingered a second longer on the apartment key. That my son avoided talking about money when we were alone, but burst into knowing laughter when she was present. Small details, almost invisible, but which accumulated like drops that, in silence, fill a bucket until it overflows. There were moments when I felt strong, ready to expose everything, as if the flame of indignation guided me. But soon after, the shadow of doubt crept in, reminding me that any rash step could push me even deeper into the trap. It was this struggle between courage and caution that sapped my strength. Each night was a battle between sleep and thoughts, between the desire to act and the fear of losing everything. I began to see the house as a stage. The dining table, once a symbol of coexistence, now seemed like the centerpiece of a play, where every line was rehearsed to hide intentions. The hallways carried echoes of conversations interrupted when I appeared. Even the simple act of opening a drawer seemed charged with hidden meaning. Living there was like walking between curtains, knowing that behind them were watchful eyes, waiting for my next move. And yet there was also a strange kind of hope. A quiet force that reminded me that the power lay not just in what they were plotting, but in what I already knew. The recording wasn't just proof of a conspiracy, it was also an opportunity to change the narrative. This thought warmed me, like a ray of sunlight filtering through the cracks of a dusty window. It was small but enough to keep me going. The contrast was constant. On one side, the throbbing fear, as if every corner hid an ambush. On the other, the certainty that fate was not yet written, and that my voice, even muffled for years, could break the silence whenever I chose. This fragile balance was what kept me from giving in to despair. I walked on invisible threads, aware that any imbalance could reveal everything prematurely. And so, between the warmth of hope and the chill of uncertainty, I realized I was getting closer and closer to the moment when the masks would fall. I didn't yet know how or when, but the feeling was clear. Something big was approaching, like the muffled sound of a storm that hasn't yet broken the sky but already rattles the windows. The next few hours were filled with a strange mixture of wakefulness and dreaming. I walked through the house with light steps, as if every wooden floor betrayed my alertness. The night was thick with silence, but within me there was a constant hum, as if my body itself couldn't rest. I felt as if time no longer flowed at the same rate. Each minute seemed to lengthen toward something that was approaching slowly but inevitably. As I opened the curtains, the moonlight timidly filtered in, shedding light only in a few spots, leaving the rest plunged into shadow. It was in this contrast that I realized the similarity with my own moment. A bright patch where the truth had already been revealed through audio, and vast areas of darkness where greater secrets still lurked. This realization made me shiver. It wasn't just about what I already knew, but about what was yet to come to light. The routine seemed loaded with hidden meanings. The simple sound of the key turning in the door made me hold my breath, as if each return was a rehearsal for something greater. The conversations in the hallway, the doors closing too quickly, the sidelong glances when they thought I wasn't noticing. Everything took on the weight of clues. It was as if the house had become a board game, and I was both a piece and a player. At certain moments, confidence would emerge, firm and almost defiant. I felt prepared, able to use every detail to my advantage, like someone learning to decipher a secret language. But doubt would soon creep in, reminding me that each misstep could cost me dearly. This oscillation was a cruel game. Hope that lit like a candle, fear that extinguished the flame in a puff. I lived between these extremes, never achieving balance. The most disturbing thing was how naturally they moved, as if nothing had been said in the audio. The quick smiles, the trivial questions, the false concern for my health. This daily performance made me feel like I was trapped inside a play, where every actor knew their role, except me. But unlike before, now I had the script hidden in my pocket, and that changed everything. Still, the weight was real. The feeling of carrying within my chest a truth that could explode at any moment consumed me. It was like holding a glass filled to the brim, knowing that one sudden movement would make it all spill. And yet I couldn't let go. I had to hold on tight until the right moment, until every recorded word was released into the light for all to see. That night, before closing my eyes, I listened to the sound of the wind against the windows. It was an insistent sound, one that seemed to repeat a silent promise. Nothing remains hidden forever. I knew the revelation was getting closer. I didn't know when or how, but I could feel throughout my body that the line separating silence and exposure was already beginning to fray. And when it broke, nothing would ever be the same again. Dawn arrived like a flash of light I hadn't asked for, but which forced me to face the weight of reality. The sun filtered through the curtains and spread across the living room floor, streaking the wood with golden streaks. It was a cruel contrast, the soft beauty of the light against the harshness of what I carried inside. I walked slowly, feeling the cold underfoot, and noticed that every detail around me seemed sharper, as if the world were telling me I could no longer live in the shadow of doubt. The audio was still saved, intact, ready to explode whenever I decided. Each time I remembered the voices and laughter, it was as if my blood pumped faster, reminding me that I wasn't a motionless victim. I was standing, breathing, holding the truth in my hands. And this awareness transformed me. It was as if I'd passed through a dark tunnel, and even before I'd reached the exit, I could already smell the damp earth after the rain, a premonition that something new was about to blossom. There was a duality within me that was difficult to explain. On one side, the open wound, the still bleeding scar, the memory of having been betrayed by the very person who was supposed to protect me. On the other, the strength born from that same pain, a kind of clarity that only absolute loss can offer. I knew I would never be the same again, and as much as that hurt, it was also liberating. I looked at the portraits on the shelf. Each frozen smile seemed to stare back at me with irony, as if it held secrets I had now finally uncovered. I touched the frames and felt the weight of the years, but along with it also the lightness of having survived each blow. Life had always tested me, and perhaps this was the final test, to discover if I had the courage to transform humiliation into revelation. It was in that moment that I understood something simple yet immense. True strength lies not in shouting the loudest, but in knowing the right moment to reveal what has been hidden. And this silent, calculated decision already gave me a sense of mastery they never imagined I could possess. Those who follow this journey feel it with me, step by step, as if they were right beside me, hearing the same bated breath before the storm. That's why the urge to leave a mark, a gesture of support, whether by liking, commenting, or choosing to stay subscribed, so often arises. Because each interaction isn't just with my story. It's with all the stories that carry the same pain and the same flame of resistance. What lies ahead is not just revenge, it is revelation. And when it arrives, there will be no curtain capable of hiding the truth. At that moment, all who have walked with me will be able to say they were present when the darkness began to give way to light. And this feeling of being here, now, witnessing the transformation, is a privilege that no betrayal can steal.